sounds like you're doing a good thing. Like all activism is under the same blanket, whether it's anti-racism activism or you know gender non-conformity, non-binary, 50 different pronoun activism, and it's a lot of it is indoctrination. It's indoctrination to progressive groupthink, and it's not necessarily what you would really think of when you think of activism. You think of the civil rights movement.
Right.
You think of activism. You think of positive things and changes that we want to take place. But when you're dealing with children and developing human beings and minds, and you're dealing with an influential person who's standing in front of these people who's older and wiser, supposedly, and they try to bend these minds towards the ideology they support, things get real weird. And if you're a parent and you're not aware that this is happening to your kid while your kid's at school, I have a buddy of mine who found something like this out was happening in his school, and then he got a hold of the paperwork, and he was furious. He was like, "This is crazy.
Right.
Like, what are we doing to children? Has this been vetted? Is this something where we're all in agreement on this sort of education process for children?"
Right. So they're reading books like I Am Jazz in California to kids, and that suggests that you might, and it tells kids that you might have a boy's brain in a girl's body. They are being taught this as if this is true, right? Now, of course, there's no evidence that you could ever have a boy's brain in a girl's body. I mean, it doesn't make sense, right? But they're taught that alongside things that are factual, that are biological.
But if someone is a trans person, so
Right.
if you are a boy who feels like you should be a girl,
Right.
wouldn't you think that is how you would describe it? You have a girl's brain in a boy's body?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, there is some evidence that there are neurological differences. That is certainly worthy of study. I mean, it's open to various kinds of interpretation, and it's a new area that's being studied, and there may be differences in transgender people's brains. There might be. I certainly would not say that there aren't. But a boy's brain, I mean, every cell in a boy's body is stamped with an XY chromosome, right? So the idea that somehow an XX chromosomed brain got stuck into his head is kind of silly, right? It's sort of more like tooth fairy stuff.
Yeah, it would be fascinating if it was true. I mean, imagine if you could run a scan, like, oh my God, your brain's pink. Look,
Right.
now we know what's wrong.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it would be wonderful if it was that simple. Like, oh, you have a cavity.
Right.
We can give you a filling.
Right.
Yeah, it's it's such a hot button subject, and when this gets discussed, anytime it gets discussed on this podcast, or I'm assuming on any podcast, it just, people explode and they get so angry about it. But where people are getting more and more sensible is when it comes to sports. I mean, that seems to be where the rubber hits the road. It really does. It seems to be where people are going, hey, this doesn't seem right, and particularly like the fighting one to me was like so egregious and so obvious. I'm hopeful that this is a transitionary period for our culture, and that we realize, like, yes, you should be kind. Yes, you should be progressive and open to all these different people that have all these different ways of being and existing in this world, but not at the expense of other people. And not in particular, like, let's not pretend that 6'5" gentleman who's 50 is the same as your 18-year-old daughter who's in college, because it's not.
Right.
We're playing games. We're playing weird ideological games.
Right.
And we are.
Yeah. And I think sports is, you're totally right. I mean, Americans are very proud of their female athletes.
Yes.
We have been for decades and decades. And now you're telling them that none of them would exist today, could exist because, we'd let biological men take away their trophies. I mean, sports is about bodies. It's not about identification. Nobody asks you how do you identify before you run a race.
Yeah. It's
just about bodies.
It is, and it's real clear that they're very different, which is why we have men's divisions and women's divisions. What is it like for teenage boys? Did you look into that at all? Do they have similar sort of issues with transitioning?
Yeah, so teenage boys is a harder case because I think for a few reasons. Are there boys whose moms will call me and say, oh my God, this happened to my son and it does not look like real gender dysphoria. He never had it. It came all of a sudden because of some trauma or some crisis, or it was suggested to him by a therapist right after his dad died, or some story like that, okay? And I didn't focus on the boys, and I didn't do it for a really important reason, but I think it's worthy of explanation and exploration. I didn't focus on the boys because with the girls it's clear. Because we have known for 100 years that there's this thing called gender dysphoria, and it overwhelmingly afflicts males. And now, out of nowhere, across America and across the West, the predominant demographic is not even, is teenage girls with no childhood history. We know that's not typical gender dysphoria. So then the question is, what is it, right? But with boys, it's more complicated because there have always been these boys, these males, who have had real gender dysphoria. So I think a lot more research has to be done in that area. And the problem is, it's hard to do it, right? Lisa Littman, who's the one who did the study on the teenage girls, she's been trying to study detransitioners. She's doing great studies on detransitioners, women who regret it, because, well, all people who regret it, but a lot of them are now women. And the reason, of course, they're not women is because they never had gender dysphoria, so they weren't cured by medical transition, so now they regret it, and they're called detransitioners, right? And she's already had her study undermined because a bunch of people, trans activists on social media, said, everyone come and validate the study, essentially. And they all did. So they falsified her results, right? Because they ruined the results. The study had to be scrapped, and now she's trying to redo it.
How did they falsify her results?
Well, they took the survey. But they were able to skew the results, right? And she saw on social media they were directing people to take the study to mess up the results. So now we have a population, detransitioners, that we need to study, we need to learn from, and you can't, right? It's hard. And that's cancel culture right there. That's shutting down medical study that will help us understand more about, gender transition and more about, gender dysphoria. And also this population of teenage girls, and it's hard to even study them.
Yeah, I was looking at a discussion about, there was a particular website that was dealing with male to female transitioners who then went back to being male again. And they were furious at this page and furious at these people for expressing their story. And I was like, I was looking at this and I was thinking to myself, it's so strange that you're looking at, when you're talking about someone who transitions, you're talking about a very small percentage of the population that is a male that feels they should be a female to begin with. And then you have this surgery and you have this chemical or hormonal intervention, and you change your body and you change who you are, and then regret, and then coming back. And they were so